Support for this show, Politics Done Right, comes from politicsdoneright.com, publishers of How to Make America Utopia, Take Away the Economy from Those Who Rigged It, As I See It, Class Warfare, The Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom, It's Worth It, How to Talk to Your Right-Wing Relatives, Friends, and Neighbors, and other books written by Egberto. Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. My name is Egberto Willies, your host. Today we are honored to have Andrew Kreig. Andrew is a Washington, D.C.-based journalist, author, attorney who has been an ASJ member since 1980. He's begun his career as a newspaper reporter with the Hartford Courant, where he frequently published magazine articles, etc. He's the author of The Complete Annotated Durham Russiagate Report, A Corrupt, Cruel Fraud. Good afternoon, El Señor Andrew Kreig. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great. The honor is mine to be on your very important show where you provide such a vital voice at this critical time.
Well, look, my friend, thank you so kindly. I tell you, your book is time. Or I know it's been out for a while, but addressing it now is timely. It is something that we need to do, especially in these times where there's so much misinformation and disinformation out there. Tell me a little bit about why you wrote this book.
Well, to go back in history a bit and rapidly bring it to the current times, I had covered courts for 5 years for the oldest newspaper in America, Hartford Courant, as you mentioned. And when I was doing it, there was a very strong ethic among at least the prosecutors, judges, and journalists I knew, that you don't bring questionable cases, particularly if the person might be innocent, particularly for political reasons. And as I've come to Washington and see situations unfold, I see people from my own area of the country where I worked, Connecticut, appointed to be top nationwide prosecutors here in Washington who have no problem going after innocent people, or at least questionably innocent, in major political cases that affect the entire country and our elections. And I thought, like some other situations, that if you're a journalist, if you're an attorney, and you know what's going on, and you're right in the middle of it, you have to bring it out. Even whether people are going to buy it and read it or not, you just have to get it out. And that's the case in this situation where people went to the FBI and said foreign governments are interfering in our elections, and they end up getting prosecuted. And
let me see if I understand you right. You're saying that the people who pointed out the problem are the ones that effectively got prosecuted.
Yes. And I covered the trials, and I knew that the two main prosecutors I had been investigating for 14 years. And I knew that they had very shady reputations. And I tried to talk to the mainstream reporters at these trials and give them a heads up. I don't need to do all those stories or write books. And nobody would really listen. And so I realized that the prosecutors, after the juries acquitted these people, were going to write a report, and the House Republicans were going to use this report to impeach the Bidens, to absolve Trump from the foreign interference that helped him previously. And all of that makes it easy for foreign interference in this election.
Now, tell us a little bit about the Durham report. What was the whole gist of that?
Well, John Durham was a career prosecutor in Connecticut, where, again, I had covered federal courts for 5 years. And I went on to Yale Law School, the University of Chicago Law School. And so I'm kind of imbued with the court system, and particularly in Connecticut. And he's been brought in as a career prosecutor. I'm using the quotation marks because he's beyond politics as a career prosecutor, right?
He's a hack, yeah.
So his first thing was to absolve the CIA in the torture allegations, the waterboarding. He says, well, it's no real problem. And his sidekick, also from Connecticut, Nora Danahy, she absolved the corrupt U.S. attorneys who 15 years ago were going after Democrats around the country for political reasons. And that was called the U.S. attorney firing scandal. So I wrote about these two 14 years ago because I knew that not only do they specialize in whitewashes of whether it's the CIA or the Justice Department, but that 3 federal judges had thrown out some of their convictions for misconduct. And nobody would really listen. I went to law professors, some of the people who appear on TV, reporters. And ultimately, I thought, let me put his report, his 300-page report, into book form with my preface and a long appendix that shows it's corrupt. He was going after innocent people and using this kind of legal mumbo-jumbo to justify it, to the great applause of the House Republicans who say, well, juries, they don't really know. It's only Republican prosecutors that know who amongst us is guilty. And if I could say one last thing, Egberto, before I stop long answer here, it's particularly relevant because of the Project 2025 that you have informed your audience of a huge threat, because I'm talking about a few very important case studies here. But imagine if Project 2025 is turned loose on 12 million immigrants, legal or not. These people don't care. And we see from the Supreme Court, from many other things that we can talk about, that once they get in, the case studies type thing I'm writing about, multiplied by hundreds of thousands.
Now, interestingly, here's the thing. Give me a couple of the names that were investigated that shouldn't have even been touched. Because what happens a lot of times is that the mere fact that an allegation is made or that they're indicted or any of those natures can actually have a political impact, Andrew. And that's, the mainstream media, as you stated earlier, they act like simply parrots often of the right. They come out and they make a mention. You try, as you said, you try to go to many mainstream reporters and say, this is bogus. They didn't listen to you. Who are some of these people that we had bogus allegations against?
Well, one that is sending a chill up my spine, not so much for him, even though his life and career and family were destroyed by this, even though he was acquitted. But I think the chill is because Michael Sussman is the name I'm talking about. He's one of the defendants. And the reason for the chill, I'm feeling it again, maybe it's just the fall here, but you see, he was part of the establishment. He had worked in high-level positions at the Department of Justice, at the FBI, and he worked for the leading Democratic law firm in Washington, maybe the country. So this is a law firm called Perkins Coie, and they represented the Democratic National Committee and the Hillary Clinton for President campaign. And what he did specifically was after the hack of the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the spring of the election year, 2016, and all of these private emails of the campaign manager and leading Democrats were leaked. And, Trump said, Russia, if you're listening, help out. And this helped screw up the Democrats with some frankly embarrassing stuff. He went to the FBI and said, as a cyber expert working with top cyber experts in the country, he believed that there was evidence of Russian involvement in this leak. And so the FBI listens to him. He actually went to a colleague of his, the former general counsel of the then general counsel of the FBI, James Baker. And there was an investigation. It wasn't particularly thorough. And they said, well, there's nothing we can do. And then Trump's elected. And then they decide, well, why don't we put Michael Sussman in prison?
That is sad. But it turns out the good thing about the whole Sussman story, after he's reported, he attempted to report the Russian allegations to the FBI, is that he was acquitted. Big blow to Durham.
Well, it was, but you see, because there aren't enough voices like yours, frankly, it gets buried in a one-day story, or actually several days. But they have Fox News, they have the majority in the House, so they bring in Durham and treat him like a conquering hero as special prosecutor who was getting at the truth. Meanwhile, Michael Sussman and the other defendants, they're acquitted, but they lose their job. He lost his partnership. And by the way, his partner, who you and many of your readers undoubtedly know, is Mark Elias, who's created the democracy document.
The vote, the one that's making sure our elections stay safe.
Exactly. So that's the case history, but there's a couple other case histories, and you'd like the name of another defendant or two. Does the name Joe Biden or Hunter Biden?
Of course.
What they did was they gamed the system. They had Trump-appointed U.S. attorneys to investigate Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, and the concept is to talk and get them then named as special prosecutors. So even after the Democrats took office, they're in there working with Russians and other, Republicans who are complicit with the Russians to hook up these cases against Joe Biden to try to get him in and to try to put both of them in prison. And then it turns out that their main witness was an agent.
Yeah. And then later on disappeared.
And they actually had to arrest the guy. But one of the things, and Hunter Biden was a drug addict, so he did a lot of unfortunate things, and they boxed him in with two Trump-appointed federal judges so that even though he had an excellent defense attorney, Abby Lowell, he was so boxed in, as many other defendants are. And this is how the Justice Integrity Project got started 15 years ago, because we were looking at how if a Democrat, or actually we're nonpartisan, if somebody is targeted, it's extremely difficult to put up a defense, because what happens is the government has
unlimited resources.
Unlimited. They say, well, we're going to put your wife and children in jail. And they win most of these cases. And that's not right. And that's not the way I was trained as a reporter. But these local news organizations are financially gutted, and they cannot do the kind of reporting that we're talking about right now.
But you actually tried yourself to get to the FBI and for them, not to these reporters, to try to get them to look at things the way they are, but to no avail, right?
Right. And part of this, I was trained to be both sides reporter. In fact, quick aside, I wrote many stories about the mafia, and then I became law clerk to a judge. He had the entire leadership of the New England Mafia going on trial. And for me to be a law clerk and help the judge in Boston, my mafia stories had to go to the mafia as well as the Justice Department. So most of the people attending the trial are, borderline cult people.
Right.
Who want to see these convictions. They're MAGA cult people. And so if you are a reporter, which I used to be one for a mainstream newspaper for 14 years before going to law school, you're a little edgy about people coming up to you. Now, I'm a member of the National Press Club. I'm very active. And in that and other journalism groups, Overseas Press Club, and there you can talk to people, but you don't necessarily have the New York Times major writers there.
Right. Well, let me tell you, one of the things that you want to highlight, first of all, with your book and the Durham Report, and how, as an example of what's happening right now with today's Justice Department, etc., you have more concerns specifically on Project 2025 and what it means to us both personally and legally as a whole. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, I will. And let me set the scene here for your audience. I'm sitting on Pennsylvania Avenue, halfway between the Congress and White House. And right one baseball throw away, a block and a half, is the headquarters of the U.S. Justice Department. And across the street is the FBI headquarters. And right up the street, a few blocks, is the Heritage Foundation, which is, where the billionaires hire these so-called academics to cook up what even the mainstream people are calling a fascist agenda in case Trump wins. So here's the larger concern. Let's start with immigration. Timothy Snyder, the Yale professor who's really extended himself on what it means to be a fascist or fight for freedom. Today's column, he says, what does it mean if Trump and his
cronies,
his cutthroats, his thugs with badges, try to round up 15 million people? That means a police state. It's not like my book where they go after a few people. They're going to be upside down, activating local law enforcement without rules, going after anybody who somebody in authority thinks should be out. And we've seen from the Supreme Court, and again, I've got law degrees from two major law schools, but they've become stooges. I mean, they rubber stamp, at least 6 of them, the idea that a president can basically do anything as long as he calls it an official act, including the argument was made to them, which they ignored. Well, suppose he orders SEAL Team 6 to murder his political opponents. Well, my book documents, mostly in the appendix, how they did go after Joe Biden and his son, but we cannot expect the Supreme Court, or particularly if it's got 3 new Trump judges to replace
Alito, Thomas, and one other.
Well, maybe Sotomayor.
Right. Oh, that would be even worse. Yeah,
because she's got, as I understand it, diabetes.
Yeah.
So even though she's slightly younger than some of the others, health. Father Time, it's Sunday football day. Father Time is undefeated. So we've got to be thinking and I say this to some of my progressive friends. I'm on the board of the Pacifica station here in Washington, and I've been a progressive. I'm nonpartisan, but I'm progressive. But some people are so fixated on some injustice from the past or currently that that's their issue. And I'm just here to say, 2 things. If you think Trump and the MAGA are going to care about these issues, forget it, because, they want to deport or jail people without hindrance. And the other thing, just a little practical view. I've spent a lot of years in politics in a way, as well as a journalist, and people are much more likely to get somewhere if they help people get elected than to stand shouting and waving a finger and voting for the opponent. What do you think?
Yeah, I tell you what, I think that's an excellent way to close, because what you just said is the most important statement. I think what you're telling people is you need to go out there and make a difference, but also make an informed decision when you're making your vote. Give me a last sentence to close us out here, my dear brother.
Well, fight for yourselves, vote for your own freedoms, vote for your own empowerment, and do it soon, because Trump has promised his people that this is the last elections. And what that means is they're anointing Vance, age 40, to be the successor. And you don't want that.
Wow. Let me just, you opened a little door that I want to enter and leave. What you just said is important, and we are already seeing a Trump in decline. I don't know that Trump lasts a year in the White House, so it would be welcome to President Vance. My dear brother, Andrew Kreig, thank you so kindly for having been.
My privilege. Thank you.
On Politics Done Right, my friend. Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. I'm your host. Today we are honored to have Judah Freed. Judah Freed is a journalist, author, storyteller, and an activist. He's the author of the book Making Global Sense: Grounded Hope for Democracy and the Earth. Let me tell you something, folks. Today, what we want to talk about is not Judah's book. We will talk about that. That's an important piece of his life and what he's speaking about. But today we need to speak about something that is existential. Today we need to speak about something that affects us all. Today, we need to speak about an aberration that needs to be fixed. Welcome to Politics Done Right. Judah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing grateful. I'm glad to be here.
Well, look, Judah, one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you is, I send out my newsletter 1 to 3 times every day. And you responded to one of my newsletter relative to Medicare and Medicare Advantage. And as soon as I saw your story, I said, I really hope this guy will tell his story to the rest of America, because stories are the way we get to make change or changes, because people don't get it when they hear it in the abstract. But when they look at you and they say, you could be me, then we start to get change. So first of all, tell me a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a Denver native. I grew up in Colorado, and back in the days of the Marlboro Man and all that Western individualism stuff. And entered journalism in 1976. Spent a decade covering Colorado, then 2 decades covering the media industry for the top trade magazines in the USA and Europe. And then when the market fell out of that in the 2009 crash, I fell in love with a beautiful, wonderful New Yorker who lived on Kauai. And she said, I love you, and why would I leave paradise? So I got rid of most of my stuff and moved to Kauai, and lived in Hawaii for a decade. And then went back to Denver in 2010 when the marriage ended, and we're still best friends. And but the part that matters is that at the end of 2015, early 2016, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And this was what they call clear cell renal cancer, which basically, by the time they caught it, the cancer had consumed my left kidney. And when they took it out in February, it swollen to about the size of a football.
Wow.
Yeah, or a cantaloupe, I guess. Cantaloupe, small football.
Right.
But anyway, it was huge. And so I was given at that point about 3 months to live, and the surgery helped, gave me a new lease on life, but it didn't get rid of the cancer. And so at that point, there was also like a thumb of the cancer started growing up the central vein to my heart, and that started regrowing as what they call a tumor thrombus, or a blood clot filled with cancer cells. And that started climbing by the autumn, that started climbing up into my heart. So I did a second surgery, and the first one was at Queens Hospital in Honolulu. The second one was at USC Keck in Los Angeles. And the doctor...
Let me stop you for a second here. At this time, how old were you?
Oh, I was 65. And the part that's relevant here is that I had been one of these guys who had been so healthy that I went to a doctor once a year, whether I needed to or not. It was like washing your hair on Saturday night. And so I got diagnosed. I started having this pain in my side and got diagnosed. And the Medicare Advantage plan that I had wasn't paying the bills.
So wait, let me get this right. So you were at 65 when your cancer was diagnosed, but it was diagnosed while you had not traditional Medicare. You had chosen Medicare Advantage.
Right, because I was so healthy. Who needs all this expensive stuff, I figured. And the Medicare Advantage plan looked like, it gave me like the silver sneakers. I go to the gym. Right. There's all these wonderful side benefits. But when I started having pain in my side and started going through testing, it wasn't covering the tests. And I would call them and they would make up stories. And, so by the time I finally got diagnosed, there was already about, close to $3,000. Well, more than that, close to about $5,000 in medical bills that hadn't yet been paid by the Medicare Advantage plan. And so when I was diagnosed, I had 3 days, because when you sign up for Medicare, when you turn 65, there's a timeline before you can sign up for full Medicare. So I had 3 days to get accepted by Medicare and transfer all of those bills to plain Medicare. And then I also got a Medicare supplement plan, because Medicare pays 80%. Right. So I need a supplement plan to pick up the other 20%.
So let me see if I understand this right, because this is important. When you were about to switch, when you realized that your Medicare Advantage was pretty much a fraud and you were going back
at least ineffective, yeah. To be polite, it was not doing its job.
I understand that. I know you're a straight line journalist. I am not. I speak things the way they are. I think, believe it or not, I think that is one of the problems in our why things we get away with, because we're polite with these criminals. We are polite with them. But your life to me is worth much more than the politeness.
Okay, so let me say it a little more bluntly. If I had stayed with the Medicare Advantage plan, I'd be dead.
There you go. That's my point.
And that's, because they were disallowing my charges. And, if they're already doing this on the diagnostics, I can just imagine what they would have done on the treatment. And so since I switched to the Medicare, this was I switched like in late December, early January in 2016. Since then, I've had four hospitalizations, 2 major surgeries, went through interleukin-2 treatment, which was ghastly. Fortunately, it's been outpaced by recent developments, but I did immunotherapy repeatedly with remission for about 2 years in between them. And finally, the immunotherapy stopped working because I guess my body just got so used to it. It wasn't, the cancer was starting to hide again. So it started regrowing in 2022. And so they discovered this past year, this summer, that the immunotherapy wasn't working. So now I'm on a cancer pill, a targeted therapy that's designed to basically kill off the blood vessels feeding the cancer.
The cancer, right.
And, that's been an adventure in and of itself. But all of this, I figure I probably had somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 million to $1.5 million worth of medical bills.
Now, interestingly, because you were able to switch to Medicare from Medicare Advantage, but not only that, I think if I understand what you're saying correctly, you were still within the 6-month window where they had
by 3 days.
By 3 days. This has to be explained to our audience. His cancer, Judah's cancer, was found at a perfect time because I hate to put it that way. Forgive me if
the timing couldn't have been any better. Yes.
Right. For being a bit insensitive, but I really want our audience to understand what's going on here. If Judah's cancer had been found 3 days later and he didn't make that switch within that 6 months after becoming 65 years old, he would not have been able to switch from Medicare Advantage to traditional Medicare. He could switch to Medicare, but he would not have been able to afford the supplemental Medigap program, or they may have denied it altogether. Yeah,
there's like in that 3 days, I contacted Medicare and got accepted, and then they took over the bills.
Right.
And then I searched out the best supplemental plan that I could find. Fortunately, my wife was on the RP plan F, and that covers everything that Medicare doesn't. If Medicare will cover the 90, they'll cover the other 20, no matter what. And so as a consequence of that, I was able to get the bills that have been accumulated that were unpaid. Those were picked up by Medicare and the supplemental plan. And then the bills I accrued going forward were picked up by Medicare and supplemental plan. But, what was so scary is that although I could have, if I hadn't been in that 3-day window, I had to wait a full year before I could apply for Medicare because there's an annual window.
Right.
And I would have been dead by then.
But the other thing that I think, and I don't know if you know this, Judah, or not, but I think it's important for folks to understand. After that 6-month period, that grace period that you have to go into Medicare, by law, your supplemental with a pre-existing condition cannot be used against you. They can't use actuarial tables against you.
Well, this was before the Obamacare was passed.
Right.
And so
right.
I didn't have 6-month window. I had a 3-month window.
Oh, wow.
Because I turned 65 in November. Mm-hmm. My birthday is coming up next week. And so then this was 3 months after I enrolled that I had to get in.
Wow.
So I didn't even have a 6-month window. I had a 3-month window. That law has changed. Now it's longer, but
now it's longer, but still,
as I understand it,
that is still problematic in that, again, if you're not in that window at 65, guys, at 65, if you're out of that window and after you find out that you have an illness and you try to go back to traditional Medicare, your 80% will be covered and you'll be able to get that. But God help you finding a supplemental that will take care of your bills. You probably couldn't afford it. Go ahead.
Well, interestingly enough, the AARP plan did accept me, even knowing that I'd been diagnosed.
You were still in the window.
I was still in the window, so I could make the change.
That's the law.
Under the law, they had to accept me.
Under the law, they had to accept you.
Yes, and this is before the Affordable Care Act, so
right.
Which eliminated the insurance self-serving protections on no pre-existing conditions.
The pre-existing condition doesn't apply, however, to Medicare after the 6 months because you had your opportunity to choose Medicare or Medicare Advantage.
Exactly.
Those are all the things that they do to go around it. But look, so in effect, by the way, how are you doing right now?
Well, the cancer's back, but I got a little something that's about. I got, and it's migrated into my lungs. So I got one tumor that's about a half an inch. I got another tumor that's about a quarter of an inch. But these had grown up until I started the new medication about an inch. Plus, I had a mass growing in the hilar lymph nodes in between my lungs, and so. Now, the interesting thing is that, so this is another thing that I need to give as advice for people. When you seek out a doctor, make sure you have a doctor that is really staying on top of the literature. Most doctors today now are employed rather than being independent. And they have a really high patient load. So as a consequence of that, they very seldom have time to really stay on top of this. So I had been blessed because I'd been in New York last June. I'm a big fan of Thomas Paine. My book is inspired by him. And so I was in New York for basically Thomas Paine's, there's a big Thomas Paine Day in New Rochelle where the National Historical Association is based. And so I went there for that. And while I was there, at the suggestion of my ex-wife, says, well, listen, you're going to be in New York, go to Sloan Kettering. And so I made an appointment. They accepted me, which was, because here's just this nebbish from Colorado. And they said, sure, yeah, we'll take you. And so I saw one of the top oncologists in the world, just luck of the draw. Or just, for whatever reason. And then this guy determined that I was on the wrong medication and referred me to an oncologist in Denver, who now I'm seeing, who is at the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center. And, rather than one of these private clinics, this is a, state-funded, it's not Medicare for all, but it's, state-funded. And I'm really grateful. This woman is just incredible. She's so on top of the medication. So when I had a health crisis in September, because there was an overlap between the immunotherapy fading out and the new drug kicking in, my body got overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And so this one was able to figure out what's happened. And then, so now I took 3 weeks off while my body recovered. I dropped down to close to 100 pounds.
Wow.
I was a skinny mini me.
Yeah.
And so now, since then I've started regaining weight, and we also found out the cancer had shrunk. So the new medication is working. And, but just, I'm in very good, excellent care, which wasn't the case before because this guy, he meant well, but he was overwhelmed, by his patient load, and he didn't have time to do his homework.
Okay, let me stop you right there because I need the audience to understand this. I am a proponent for having real health care, which means universal health care. You can call it Medicare for all if you want. You can call it healthcare for all. But Judah's experience just was the answer to your question. A doctor in the public domain, a doctor in the commons, a doctor that is...
Yeah, it's a privately run college, but it's fine. State college. But
it's a state college that receives a whole lot of grants and all these items. They don't have to be overwhelmed by patients.
And they're a research center as well.
And they're a research center. You realize what we talk about, medicine for profit versus medicine to heal. There is a difference when you have medicine for profit versus medicine to heal. His life wasn't only saved because he went from Medicare Advantage to traditional Medicare, but it was also saved because he went to an institution where profit wasn't the sole motive for giving care. It's important for us to understand this. Go ahead.
My nutshell view of that is that I don't think, I'm a big advocate of human rights and civil rights and what Paine called natural law. And, the people in the Enlightenment, the 18th century. But my belief is that my body should not be somebody else's profit center.
Exactly. That's, what? I tell you what, I think that's the way to end this conversation. You nailed it. If we take what you've just said, my body is not somebody else's profit center. That answers our healthcare problem. That presents us with our healthcare solution. We should have universal healthcare covered by our society which we all participate in. Thank you, Judah. So
before we go, I want to add one thing that might help readers, your listeners. You had a guest on your show some time ago, Jerry Ashton, who was the author of a book called, or one of the three authors of a book called End Medical Debt, which I edited and published. And if people get that book, they can understand. There's detailed in there because it was written by a healthcare administrator and two medical debt collectors, who, by the way, started a charity now called Undo Medical Debt, which has forgiven somewhere upwards of $13 billion in medical debt. But this book goes through why the medical situation, how we evolved into a for-profit healthcare industry. We no longer give a chicken to the doctor to pay for our doctor visitor, let alone house calls. But if people want to really understand why the insurance industry is the way it is, how we have consolidated healthcare in this country, I really do recommend this book. And by the way, people ought to know that for every copy that sells, forgives about $500 in medical debt because I donate the money donate 85% of the money to the charity.
Judah Freed, thank you very much for your work as an activist in healthcare and otherwise. And I think your story will enlighten quite a few, and it'll continue to put us on the path where we actually get a humane healthcare system. You have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be here.
We have the honor of speaking to Karl Smith. Karl Smith is an activist. Karl Smith is an engineer. Karl Smith is a program writer. He does a whole lot. But most importantly, Karl Smith cares about our country. Karl Smith created a website, votereducationproject.com, votereducationproject.com, that everybody needs to go to. He has not a point of view, what I like to call the point of view, because it is, in fact, the truth that we all should know. Because guess what? Technically speaking, we all live by. Karl Smith, how are you doing this morning, my friend?
Very good. I hope you're doing well, too.
Yes, I'm doing fine. Look, Karl, I so badly wanted to talk to you about where we stand here as in our political system. And I asked you to send me your outline that pretty much defines where we've been, where we are going, where we really need to go. So I want to start this way. One of the biggest things on people's minds right now is inflation. And we have everybody, specifically on the Trump side, trying to pin this thing on the Biden administration. Tell me a little bit about what really is the genesis of the inflation that's hurting quite a few Americans.
Well, the Republicans really want to, don't want people to think about, what actually happened. And that is that COVID happened and, the worst pandemic in 100 years. And it caused huge, turmoil in our financial systems and demand and supply and all of that. Just, we're living through a very turbulent time. And, whether Biden or Trump was as president in the last 4 years, that would have been different. This is a worldwide problem, not just something, with the United States. So COVID and price gouging, are actually responsible for that, the current high prices that a lot of people are suffering through.
Now, interestingly, you point out,
and that's, there's just no way around it. Trump would have had the same problems.
Exactly. There's another point that you bring out, and that is, how do we compare to the rest of the world? You would think that if Biden has the worst economic message or economic prowess in the world, that maybe we wouldn't be doing as well, right?
Yeah, and what Biden did and the Recovery Act and all these things, all the things that they did caused us to come back quicker and better than all the other advanced economies. Our inflation rate is the economy is actually doing very well for a lot of people, and for especially if you're wealthy, it's doing extremely well. It's just that there's far too many people, that are suffering, from that. So, but who is really to blame? For that suffering? Is it really the Democrats, or it's the Republicans, or if it's COVID or whatever, the actual suffering? So we're going through turbulent time. We cannot avoid that. I mean,
tell me, who is to be blamed? Because, I mean, when people go to the voting booth, they want to blame somebody for their pain and hire somebody who's going to solve their pain. So who's to be blamed for these things that didn't start now? It is actually systemic. You made just a very important point, Karl. You said the economy is doing well for a whole lot of people, especially if you're rich, but it's doing well for a lot of people. And then there are those who are struggling. And there is something systemic that causes that struggle.
And so think about it, how much better off people would be, if we had not extended, or if we had extended this child tax credit. And who blocked that? That was the Republicans. Okay, that was several $1,000s per child, that would have made a big difference in terms of these higher grocery prices and all of that stuff. What about the minimum wage? If we had actually a livable minimum wage today, how much better off would people have been prepared? There'd been far too fewer people right on the edge, living hand to mouth. They'd have a lot more cushion. Plus, they'd have actually a livable wage to go through this turbulent time. So, from 1968 to today, this is not like what they've done just recently. This has been a long-term thing. This is their battle plan and all that. So they basically have been cutting the minimum wage from 1968 to today. It'd be over $17 an hour.
Amazing.
Think about that. That plus child tax credits, people would be better, way better off, but for the Republicans. Then the other thing would be basically on, who has been allowing these sectors to collapse, or to consolidate. That eliminates competition, because the other thing that's happening is price gouging. So it's COVID and all the instability from that, but also there's price gouging on top of that. Who's to blame for that? That's the Republicans again. So the people that are suffering, it's the responsibilities of Republicans, and they want to do more of it. You won't do better under a Trump presidency. You will do worse, because all the things that he's talking about basically will make the poor poorer and the rich richer.
And studies that have come out have said just that. Like I said, our problem is systemic. Now, there are 2 points here that you talk about. Make America great again and make America great for everyone. I want to combine those into explain to the population why to some make America great again is offensive, while make America great for everyone is what we should all strive to.
Right. Well, it wasn't so good for a lot of people. When you say make America great again, women go, what? They didn't have so many rights. Minorities, disabled people, LGBTQ, and the poor. I mean, the GOP has had their boot on the backs of or the necks of the poor, literally for decades, getting the poor to do worse and worse and worse over time. But we have made a lot of progress in other areas, in racial relations and with women. They have more rights today, but they still don't have equal rights under the Constitution with men. And who's responsible? Republicans.
That is, and I think people have to get that notion that, there are a lot of policies we want to get through that would help everyone, but they stop these policies. And then after stopping these policies, they say, hey, you see, things aren't all that good under you. So you said we should be asking the right questions. What are the right questions as you see it?
Yeah, and then back up just a second there. So on the other side, it's make America great for everyone, and that's, if you look at what the Democrats do, they haven't been saying that. They don't necessarily sell their product very well. But if you look at their policies, they invest in all these different things that actually not only help people but also help business and helps a great economy. So, so basically what I did is I looked at what the Democrats actually did, their policies and all of that. And then, boiled out, some basic kind of umbrellas on what, what they do, how that works for everybody. A lot of people don't understand how what Democrats do helps them, so it's easy for them without that explanation, without that understanding. It's easy for somebody else to come in and say, hey, you can put sand in your gas tank and everything will be fine. They just don't understand how it works. So basically, what the questions we should be asking are like, what makes people thrive and what makes businesses thrive? Because we need our businesses to do well, because that's where our products and services and most of our jobs are coming from. But businesses actually need people to do well, because the poor really suck as customers.
Yes.
They've got lots of needs. but they don't have any money. So they're not a good customer. But the more people that thrive, the more businesses that thrive, not just the top businesses, but, our small businesses and businesses out in the rural areas and farmers, and everybody does better if, all the businesses do better if most of the people thrive. So basically going into that on like when you ask the right questions, what does it take for people to thrive? Because that's the Constitution, is the general welfare. The government has to look after the general welfare. Well, to me, that means, okay, if people are thriving and businesses are thriving, well, they've looked after the general welfare. So what makes people and businesses thrive? Well, I boil that down to like three basic areas. One is our basic public investments. Another is valuing all workers. We all need good wages and so on. And if we're not paid for actually doing what we do then we look like a third world country where 2/3 to 3/4 of their population is in poverty. We also need, both people and businesses need, a fair system, or else it just kind of goes to the few and the powerful and all of that. So I break down this basic public investments. What's that? That's education, healthcare, research, safe communities, community development, and our safety nets. And people benefit from all those. But guess what? Businesses need healthy and educated people. They need also infrastructure. They need research, safe communities, community development, and our safety nets. It's the same basic set of things. So that's our basic public investments. And, then the fair system would be a livable wage, equal work for equal pay, or equal pay for equal work, and then workers' rights. And then a fair system, Robert Reich, and many other economists go into all the different things we could do to make the system fair for small companies and people, just the average, out in the middle of the
America.
country. Yeah. And so we can do things. And when we make these investments, a few things about it, it's putting money in every single community in the country. When we invest in education, healthcare, where does that go? Everywhere.
Ironically, that is exactly, if you take a look at the IRS, the investment bill, I forgot what IRS stands for, reinvestment, whatever it's called. It turns out that most of that money for this bill, because the red states are the states in most needs, most of the infrastructure bill, most of all these other bills, the monies go to these states. It goes all over the country, but they get an amount that doesn't reflect their people.
Yeah, a disproportionate amount. And that's
exactly.
a good thing.
And it's a good thing. We want to do that. But if you watch what you're hearing in the ads in these areas, you would never know that.
Right.
And that goes into one of the most important things you say, the welfare of all, a good make America great for all. And if you fix where it needs to be fixed, that's what you're doing. Now, I want to switch the discussion a bit, because in your write-up here, you spoke about democratic socialism as a misnomer. Tell me a little bit about that, because I think that is something that the right tries to hammer on standard traditional Democrats.
Yeah, I mean, every time we want to invest in education or healthcare or whatever, the Republicans say, oh, socialism. They even say communism, although that's a political system and not an economic system. But anyway, so, they hammer on that as if we were going to take people's property and
means of production.
Away. Yeah, and that is not what we're doing. If you look at these things called, even some Democrats will call themselves democratic socialists. Okay, but if you look at these countries that are doing that, where are most of their products and services coming from? Government?
No, they're coming from private enterprise.
Exactly. So if you had a blue sky and there's a few clouds, why would you call it a cloudy day? Why would you call it the thing that it's a little bit of, mostly something else? Wouldn't you call it like a sunny day? If you have a few clouds over there, you would call it a sunny day. So these are not socialisms. These are actually sustainable capitalisms. These aren't rigged capitalisms that benefit the few. These are sustainable capitalisms that benefit everybody. This is not social, not the same thing as hardcore socialism, taking people's property. These are creating, when we invest in people's education and healthcare, and in the research and the opportunity safe community, all these things. It creates opportunities for people. And a healthy and educated person makes far more money over their lifetime than a person that doesn't get that. And if we only give those things to the more wealthy people, we don't have enough healthy and educated people for our businesses. Our economy suffers, people suffer, our businesses suffer. It just absolutely makes no sense. And the Republicans want to cut all these things, which is crazy. And these are, there's an initial stimulus effect because when you invest in all these things, it puts a lot of money at the bottom of the economy. And that, so those people are spending it quickly. Then businesses, there's another point here. When do businesses invest? And when do rich and businesses invest? When they have more money or when they have more customers with more money?
When they have more custom, exactly.
So Republicans think, okay, well, you just give the job creators more money and they'll do it. No, the job creators need that money gets pulled in when their business plans work out.
Let's make it clear. The job creators. I'm looking at a job creator right now, right. Carl. We are job creators.
Yes, the people. Money.
Exactly. It's important. Now, you wanted to segue a bit into speaking about freedoms because that really tied directly into society as a whole. Talk to me about it, and then we'll sort of close out with lies, if you will. So let's go ahead and talk about freedoms.
Yeah, well, so another thing is like the Republicans will say, oh, we're, the Democrats are just trying to turn everybody gay and all this kind of stuff, and it's really that, when you fight or when we fight for the rights of everybody, even people that we don't want to be, even lifestyles that we don't want ourselves, when we fight for everybody's rights, and we're fighting for our own rights.
I want to point out something, Karl, because there's something in that list that you talk about, and I think people need to understand this. You would see something like the ACLU fight for somebody that they completely disagree with. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that not only for the ACLU, but how we need to think about freedom. You mentioned fighting for the groups you do not want to be a part of. Mm-hmm. That is how you know you really have a free society. Continue. I wanted to interrupt that because I wanted to stress that it is something that Liz Cheney is doing right now. When Liz Cheney comes out and supports Kamala Harris and say, I don't agree with her on policy, but for the better good of the country, I understand what is of importance. Continue, my brother.
Well, and I think once Liz Cheney understands some of these things, I think, and actually Republicans used to invest in all of these things too.
Right.
And that's how, after World War II, we made all these investments that transformed America. Back in the 1800s, before we started doing a lot of, public education, all that stuff, 75% of our population was in poverty.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, Republicans, they can take us back there where more and more of our people will be in poverty, live in hand to mouth and all of that stuff. But we don't want to go back there.
This is out of scope, but I want both Republicans, Democrats, and everybody else to listen to us, not just hear us, but listen to what we're saying. Because I give kudos to Republicans. Republicans were very instrumental in things like getting the Civil Rights Act passed. It wasn't Democrats that would have fulfilled that dream. So, I mean, there's a whole lot of credit around. People change, parties change, all things change around. What we want is to ensure that we have a system, as Karl puts it, make America great for everyone. Karl, I want to move on to you mentioned about that, gay rights and all this sort of stuff that they like to use as wedge issues. We know that. But you also pointed out that one of the biggest problems in society, not society in the way Republicans campaign right now, in the way they do things, and the way they govern, is the inability to tell the truth about reality. Please let's break up on that and let's close on that. I want to also talk a little bit about your video right at the end.
Okay. So, Republicans are lying about, both what they believe and stand for and do, what their policies are. And they also lie about the Democrats and so on. And without a really good explanation of how what we do works, then it kind of leaves that door open for them to do that. So they're lying about us being socialists. We're not socialists in the way that we're, that they're defined. We're actually enabling capitalism to work for everybody. They're lying about our economy. They want you to have amnesia and not remember that we just went through the worst pandemic and all of the financial interruptions and so on, in a century, and just blame the or the Democrats, for the current high prices. And then all of the other things, the people suffering from it, they don't want you to connect the dots and understand it is their policies that are making people suffer. That's unnecessarily. This is a self-inflicted wound, not by the Democrats, but by the Republicans. They lie about the border. They say these people are, the countries are sending these people from their prisons, from their mental institution. That is plain bullshit. They are not being sent. These are hardworking people coming just like, most people that came to the United States. And it's because they're coming in illegally because of our broken immigration system that we finally had a chance to make some progress on, and then Trump shot that down as well. So they're lying about the border. These are not people coming and killing us and all that. These people are when they come into the country, their rates are far, in terms of crimes they commit and so on, far less than our own citizens.
I want to add to that. I think it's important. Yes, their crime rate is low relative to the American-born citizen. Another thing is a lot of these guys pay into Social Security, Medicare,
and then they don't get it back.
And they will never, ever get it back because they're not U.S. citizens or legal residents of the United States. So they are a net positive to keep the and it's a bad thing, but net positive to keep it afloat. You also mentioned about lying on abortion, which they do, making the belief that Democrats want laissez-faire abortion and killing babies outside of the wombs, the most heinous, ridiculous things. But you know what? What we are into is making sure people remain informed. And I want to thank Karl Smith, first of all, for his relatively new website, votereducationproject.com. And I want him to talk in about 30 seconds or so about his video that tries to explain some of the things that we need to really be aware of.
Yeah, I just redeveloped the website, so I boiled it down to just a few things. And there's one thing is a video explaining. It's really explaining economics, but also it shows like how bottom up economics works. And actually, there's some the flip side of that, how trickle down really doesn't work. But that's more implied through it. And it's not socialism. It's actually creating opportunities for people, and it actually creates and saves more tax revenue than cost. So this is financially, it's fiscally responsible. It's not wild, I don't know, some sort of economics that the Republicans are trying to paint this out. It's basically, it's good, solid stuff. It's like a Republican would, it's not that they wouldn't go out and borrow money to build a house or a solid investment and all that. They would, even though they're conservative. So it's the same thing. When we invest in our education, infrastructure, and research and all of that, these are investments that pay off.
Karl Smith.
So votereducationproject.com is the basic website. And then there's a video in there, but there's also there's our democratic values. If you look at what Democrats do, this is a small set of things.
I wouldn't call it a small set of things. I think it's well done. I really appreciate that you put the work into that. But Karl, it's a succinct
set of things. Let me put it that way. It's not. It doesn't go. It's this one pager.
Exactly. And it's important. It's an important one page. We got to close here. Look, folks, I want to thank Karl Smith, activist, engineer, founder of votereducationproject.com. Please visit the site. Karl, thank you so kindly for being on Politics Done Right.
Thank you for what you do.
Support for this show, Politics Done Right, comes from politicsdoneright.com, publishers of How to Make America Utopia, Take Away the Economy from Those Who Rigged It. As I See It, Class Warfare, the Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom. It's Worth It, How to Talk